Isaiah Cole, a decorated U.S. Army veteran, just wanted a quiet night out at a local football game. The crowd roared, the game heated up, and Isaiah's mind wandered to simpler times. But when a rowdy biker gang started harassing fans near him, he couldn't ignore it. A small confrontation spiraled into chaos as the bikers underestimated who they were dealing with. Isaiah's calm demeanor masked a storm they didn't see coming, and by the end of the night, no one would forget what happened. Isaiah Cole sat in his car, the faint hum of the engine blending with the distant cheers of the stadium crowd. The Friday night lights glowed like beacons of nostalgia, illuminating the small-town football field. After months of rigorous military duty, this game felt like a slice of peace, a reminder of simpler times. The crisp autumn air carried the aromas of popcorn and grilled hot dogs, and the sound of the marching band tuning up floated through the air. Tonight, Isaiah wanted nothing more than to blend into the crowd and enjoy the game. As he approached the ticket booth, the attendant, a man in his 60s with a warm smile, greeted him. "Big game tonight," he said, tearing Isaiah's ticket. Isaiah nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting into a polite smile. He tucked the stub into his jacket pocket and entered the stadium, the lively atmosphere embracing him. Families cheered, children waved foam fingers, and the energy was infectious. Isaiah found his seat, high enough to see the entire field but low enough to catch the action. The first quarter passed uneventfully, the home team holding a narrow lead. Isaiah's eyes followed the game, but his mind wandered. The precision of the players reminded him of his unit back on the base, how each person had a role, how success depended on trust. He was pulled from his thoughts when a commotion erupted behind him. A group of 6 men in leather jackets filed into the row just above his. Their boisterous laughter and crude jokes disrupted the peaceful hum of the crowd. Isaiah glanced back briefly, his trained instincts kicking in. The bikers were loud and unapologetic, their behavior becoming more obnoxious by the minute. One of them flicked a cigarette butt onto the steps, ignoring the no-smoking signs. Another loudly insulted a player on the home team, drawing disapproving glances from nearby fans. Isaiah stayed quiet, hoping they'd lose interest and settle down. But then one of them, a burly man with a skull tattoo on his neck, leaned over the seat in front of him, snatching a young boy's popcorn. "Thanks, kid," the biker said mockingly, shoving a handful into his mouth. The boy looked up at him, frozen in fear. Isaiah felt his jaw tighten. He took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. He had faced enemies far more dangerous than this gang of bullies, but that didn't make their actions any less infuriating. Still, it wasn't his fight, not yet. The second quarter began, but Isaiah's focus remained divided between the game and the bikers' growing disruptions. They spilled drinks, mocked other fans, and made a show of blocking the aisle whenever someone tried to pass. By halftime, Isaiah had had enough. He stood up slowly, his calm movements drawing the attention of those around him. The bikers noticed too, their laughter pausing as they turned to size him up. Isaiah wasn't particularly tall or bulky, but there was a quiet intensity in his stance, a confidence that came from years of disciplined training. He locked eyes with the skull-tattooed biker. "That's enough," Isaiah said, his voice low but firm. "You're ruining this for everyone. Sit down or leave." The biker sneered, clearly unimpressed. "And who's gonna make us?" "You," he said, leaning forward aggressively. His friends laughed, egging him on. Isaiah didn't flinch. "Yes," he replied simply. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken resolve. For a moment it seemed like the biker might back down, but then he stepped closer, his smirk widening. "You've got guts, old man. I'll give you that, but you're outnumbered." He gestured to his friends who stood up behind him, their postures menacing. The tension was palpable, parents pulling their children closer as fans whispered nervously. Isaiah didn't move, his eyes never leaving the man in front of him. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, but his years of training kept him grounded. He wasn't afraid of a fight, but he also knew when to wait. The lead biker cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing through the now silent section of the stands. Before anything could escalate further, 2 stadium security guards arrived, alerted by concerned fans. "Is there a problem here?" one of them asked, his hand resting on the baton at his hip. The biker hesitated, glancing at Isaiah and then at the guards. "No problem," he said finally, his bravado faltering. "Just a misunderstanding." The guards didn't look convinced but escorted the bikers to another section of the stadium nonetheless. As they left, the skull-tattooed man shot Isaiah a look that promised the encounter wasn't over. Isaiah watched them go, his expression unreadable. Around him, the crowd began to relax, murmurs of relief rippling through the stands. A few people nodded at Isaiah in silent gratitude, but he simply sat back down, his focus returning to the game. The rest of the night passed without incident, but the unease lingered. Isaiah hadn't come to the game looking for trouble, but trouble had a way of finding him. And when it did, he was always ready. Isaiah Cole sat quietly in his seat, watching the game as though nothing had happened. But his mind was elsewhere, replaying the tense encounter with the bikers. Their leader's sneer, the mocking laughs of his friends, the way they preyed on the vulnerable. It all left a bitter taste in his mouth. Isaiah wasn't the type to look for trouble, but he couldn't ignore it when it came knocking. He thought the security guards escorting the gang away would end it. He was wrong. The third quarter had barely started when Isaiah noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. The bikers were back, spread out in the lower stands. Their leader, standing at the top of the aisle, locked eyes with Isaiah. His smirk was gone, replaced by cold determination. Isaiah recognized it instantly. It was the look of someone not done proving a point. Isaiah's instincts sharpened. He scanned the crowd, noting the exits and the bikers' positions. They weren't here for the game. They were here for him. For a moment, Isaiah debated leaving, but dismissed the thought quickly. If he walked away now, he'd be giving them the satisfaction they sought. No, he wouldn't run. Not from them, not from anyone. The game played on, cheers growing louder as the home team scored a touchdown. But Isaiah couldn't focus. The gang's leader began descending the aisle slowly, like a predator stalking prey. Isaiah felt his muscles tense, his body preparing for what might come next. "Hey, soldier boy," the man called out as he reached Isaiah's row. His voice cut through the noise, drawing the attention of nearby fans. Isaiah turned, his expression calm but unyielding. "I thought we told you to mind your business," the biker continued, his tone dripping with hostility. Isaiah didn't respond right away, studying the man. His hand hovered near his pocket, a sign he might be armed. Years of experience told Isaiah to stay alert. Finally, Isaiah spoke. "I'm here for the game," he said evenly. "If you're smart, you'll let it go and do the same." The biker chuckled, but it lacked humor. "You think you're tough, huh? Think 'cause you served you can walk around like you own the place?" His voice grew louder, and parents pulled their children closer. Isaiah's tone stayed steady. "I don't think anything, but I know bullies when I see them." The biker's face darkened, taking a step closer. "You don't know a damn thing about me," he growled. Isaiah held his gaze. "I know enough," he replied quietly. The air grew electric with tension. One of the biker's friends began to move toward them, but Isaiah raised a hand. "You don't want to do this," he warned, his voice calm but firm. The friend hesitated, looking to the leader for guidance. Before anything more could happen, security appeared, this time with more personnel. "Is there a problem here?" one of the guards asked, addressing the biker leader. "You need to leave." The man's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing at the guards. "I'm not going anywhere," he said defiantly. The guards didn't back down. "Leave now, or we'll remove you," one said, hand on his radio. The standoff lasted a few tense seconds before the leader relented. He turned to Isaiah, his eyes burning with resentment. "This ain't over," he said in a low voice before signaling to his friends to follow. They left reluctantly, their heavy footsteps echoing on the concrete steps. Isaiah watched them go, his expression unreadable. Around him, the crowd began to relax and the game resumed. But Isaiah knew this wasn't over. The man's parting words and the look in his eyes were a promise of more to come. The fourth quarter began, and the tension in the air slowly dissipated. Fans cheered as the home team scored again, and for a moment the night felt normal. Isaiah allowed himself to relax slightly, though his senses stayed sharp. He'd learned long ago that complacency could be dangerous. As the game ended and the crowd filed out, Isaiah stayed behind, watching the field empty. He wanted to ensure the bikers were gone before he left. He spotted a security guard nearby and approached him. "Thanks for stepping in earlier," Isaiah said sincerely. The guard nodded. "No problem. Those guys have been causing trouble for weeks. We've been trying to ban them from the stadium." He paused, studying Isaiah. "You handled yourself well. Not many would stand up to them." Isaiah shrugged. "Just doing what's right." The guard smiled faintly. "If you ever need help, let us know." Isaiah nodded in appreciation before heading to the parking lot. It was mostly empty, the hum of departing cars fading into the night. He climbed into his truck and sat for a moment, the evening's events replaying in his mind. He didn't regret standing up to the bikers, but he couldn't shake the feeling this wasn't over. As he drove away, the glow of the stadium lights faded in his rearview mirror. The night was quiet, but Isaiah's thoughts were loud. He'd faced tougher challenges, but something about this encounter felt different. The bikers weren't just troublemakers, they were a storm brewing, and Isaiah knew he'd have to weather it one way or another. Isaiah Cole knew better than to ignore his instincts. The bikers had been escorted out of the stadium, but their leader's ominous promise, "This ain't over," echoed in his mind. As he drove home that night, he checked his mirrors, scanning for signs of a tail. The quiet hum of the truck's engine did little to settle the knot in his stomach. His gut told him the confrontation wasn't over. The streets were mostly empty, illuminated by faint streetlights and the occasional glow of passing cars. Isaiah turned into his neighborhood, the rows of modest houses offering a brief sense of calm. He parked in his driveway, stepping out of the truck deliberately. Years of military discipline had ingrained in him the habit of scanning his surroundings, even when he was back home. Satisfied that all was clear, he headed inside. Isaiah's home was simple but orderly, reflecting his personality. After locking the door, he set his keys on the counter and glanced at the military duffel bag by the couch. It hadn't been unpacked since his return, a silent reminder of the transient nature of peace. He sank into his armchair, replaying the night's events. The bikers weren't just looking for trouble. They thrived on it. Their leader struck Isaiah as dangerous, someone who used intimidation as a weapon. Men like him didn't take kindly to being challenged, and Isaiah knew he had become their target. Sleep eluded him that night. Every sound outside, a rustle of leaves, a faint engine hum, set his senses on high alert. By dawn, he had barely rested. The next day passed uneventfully, though the sense of being watched never left him. Isaiah went about his routine, running errands, grabbing groceries, and hitting the gym. At the supermarket, he noticed a motorcycle parked nearby. Its rider was nowhere in sight, but Isaiah took note of its scuffed leather seat and chipped paint. He walked past it, seemingly unbothered, but his instincts stayed sharp. At the gym, a man loitered near the parking lot. He didn't wear a biker jacket, but his furtive glances made Isaiah cautious. Isaiah cut his workout short, leaving through a side exit and circling the block to ensure he wasn't followed. The unease lingered, an unwanted companion. By evening, the feeling of dread intensified. As Isaiah locked his front door, the rumble of motorcycle engines broke the silence. The sound grew louder, reverberating through the quiet neighborhood. They were here. Isaiah stepped onto his porch, scanning the street as 3 motorcycles pulled up. Their engines growled and the riders dismounted. The leader stepped forward first, his two companions flanking him. Their movements were slow, deliberate, designed to intimidate. "I thought you'd had enough at the game," Isaiah said, his voice steady. The leader smirked. "You embarrassed me," he said. "In front of my friends, in front of a crowd. That doesn't sit right." Isaiah's gaze flicked briefly to the other two bikers. "You came all this way for that?" he asked. "Must have hit a nerve." The smirk faltered for a moment before the leader recovered. "You think you're funny, soldier boy? Let's see how funny you are when it's 3 against 1. Isaiah didn't move. "I don't want trouble," he said. "But if you're here to start something, you'd better be ready to finish it." The leader's expression darkened. "Oh, I'm ready," he growled, throwing a wild punch. Isaiah sidestepped, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it. The biker cried out, dropping to one knee. The other two hesitated briefly before charging. Isaiah released the leader and pivoted. One swung a punch that Isaiah blocked effortlessly, countering with a jab to the ribs. The second tried to grab him from behind, but Isaiah used the man's momentum to send him sprawling. He moved with the precision of a soldier, controlled, efficient, and relentless. The fight ended in under a minute. The leader staggered to his feet, clutching his wrist, his face twisted with rage. "You're gonna regret this," he spat. Isaiah stood firm. "Not as much as you will if you come back," he said evenly. The bikers exchanged glances before retreating to their motorcycles. The leader hesitated, glaring at Isaiah. "This ain't over," he said before revving his engine and disappearing into the night. Isaiah remained on the porch long after they were gone. He knew this wasn't the last he'd see of them. Men like that didn't know how to let things go. Inside, he locked the door and checked the windows before unzipping his duffel. From it, he pulled out a tactical knife and a small med kit. He wasn't looking for a fight, but if one came, he'd be ready. The next morning, Isaiah reinforced his home's security, installing stronger locks and testing the alarm system. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. Years in the military had taught him that being ready for the worst often kept the worst at bay. As the sun set, the neighborhood grew quiet, but Isaiah's instincts told him this wasn't over. He sat by the window, his knife within reach, his eyes scanning the street. The night stretched on, heavy with tension. Whatever came next, Isaiah was ready to meet it head-on. He had no choice. The morning after the bikers came to his house, Isaiah Cole woke with a renewed sense of vigilance. He knew their promise wasn't empty. The leader's words, "This ain't over," echoed in his mind like a warning bell. Isaiah's military experience taught him threats like these were rarely idle. He wasn't dealing with punks, he was dealing with men who thrived on fear and control. Isaiah spent the morning reinforcing his home security. The locks were upgraded to heavy-duty models, windows tested, and the alarm system armed. Every step he took was methodical. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. If they returned, he'd be ready. By mid-morning, Isaiah decided to visit the local hardware store. On the surface, it was a routine trip, but in reality, it was a chance to gauge the neighborhood. Isaiah believed in knowing the terrain, whether a battlefield or his own street. He wanted to see if the bikers were still lurking. The hardware store was quiet. As Isaiah browsed the aisles, he caught a glimpse of a man standing near the exit. The man wasn't shopping. He was watching. Isaiah could feel the weight of the gaze, the way it lingered just a second too long. He didn't react outwardly but made a mental note. Leather boots, a dark jacket, and an unmistakable air of suspicion. Isaiah finished his purchase and left. The man was gone, but Isaiah didn't lower his guard. He took a longer route back to his truck, scanning for signs of a tail. Satisfied he wasn't being followed, he drove home. But the uneasy feeling in his gut persisted. The rest of the day passed quietly, but the quiet felt wrong. It was the kind of stillness that came before a storm. Isaiah's instincts told him the bikers were planning something bigger than a late-night visit. As night fell, Isaiah prepared himself. His tactical knife and medkit were laid out on the coffee table. His duffel, packed with essentials, was near the door. The house was dark, except for a dim lamp in the living room. He wanted to see them coming and have the advantage. Around midnight, a car crept down the street. It wasn't the motorcycles Isaiah expected, but the car's slow, deliberate movement caught his attention. The headlights were dimmed, the engine barely audible. The car stopped a few houses down, and a man stepped out. Even in the dim light, Isaiah recognized the leather jacket. It was one of them. The man lingered near the car, glancing around as if checking for witnesses. After a few minutes, he walked toward Isaiah's property, stopping at the edge of the yard. Isaiah stayed still, watching from the shadows. The biker stood there, staring at the house, then reached into his jacket. Isaiah moved silently through the house, positioning himself near the door with his knife in hand. He wasn't going to wait for trouble to come to him. He tensed, listening, as something hit the porch. A soft thud, not glass or a body. Isaiah glanced through the window. A small object lay on the porch, a folded piece of paper weighted by a rock. Cautiously, Isaiah opened the door and retrieved the paper. Unfolding it, he found a crude skull and crossbones drawing with the words, "You're dead," scrawled beneath it. His jaw tightened. If this was meant to scare him, it failed. It confirmed what he already knew. The bikers weren't done with him. The roar of an engine broke the silence. The biker was already speeding away in his car. Isaiah didn't chase him. There was no point. The message had been delivered. The escalation had begun, and Isaiah had no intention of backing down. Inside, Isaiah locked the door behind him. Sitting at the window, he placed the paper next to his knife. His resolve hardened. This wasn't just a warning. It was a declaration. The next encounter wouldn't be intimidation. It would be a confrontation. And Isaiah would make sure he was the one who set the terms. As he sat in silence, his mind raced through possible scenarios. Would they return as a group, looking to overwhelm him with numbers? Or would the leader escalate things himself? Isaiah knew better than to guess. He prepared for the worst. His training had taught him one important truth. The only thing predictable about danger was its unpredictability. The hours crept by, and Isaiah remained by the window. The neighborhood was still, the kind of quiet that made his skin crawl. Every now and then, a car would pass, its tires whispering against the asphalt, but none of them lingered. Isaiah's gaze stayed sharp, his knife never far from his hand. The minutes felt like hours, but Isaiah was patient. He'd been trained to wait, to endure the unease that came with the unknown. Whatever the bikers were planning, they wouldn't find him unprepared. His resolve was unshakable. Morning light finally broke over the horizon, painting the street in pale gold. The tension in Isaiah's shoulders didn't ease, but he allowed himself a moment to stretch, his body stiff from the long night. He knew the bikers weren't gone. They were waiting, planning. And so was he. As the sun rose higher, Isaiah took stock of his supplies. The tactical knife was sharp, the medkit fully stocked, and his duffel packed with everything he might need. He wasn't looking for a fight, but if one came, he would meet it head-on, just as he always had. The day ahead would be quiet, but Isaiah knew better than to trust it. This was far from over. Isaiah Cole knew the quiet wouldn't last. The bikers had made their intentions clear. They weren't backing down, and neither was he. The morning passed uneventfully, but the weight of anticipation hung heavy in the air. Every creak of the house, every car that slowed on his street, sent his senses into overdrive. He didn't allow himself to relax. He couldn't afford to. Around midday, Isaiah went for a run. It wasn't about fitness. It was about clearing his mind and staying sharp. As he ran through the neighborhood, he kept his eyes peeled for anything out of place. The streets were quiet, but Isaiah knew better than to let his guard down. When he returned home, a black envelope was wedged into his front door. Someone had been there while he was gone. He retrieved the envelope and found a single word scrawled inside. Tonight. The message was clear. The bikers were coming, and this time, they weren't just here to scare him. He stepped inside, locking the door behind him. The adrenaline coursing through his veins was familiar, almost comforting. He'd faced danger before. This was no different. Isaiah spent the day preparing. He reinforced doors and windows and set up simple alarms with fishing line and cans. They didn't need to be fancy, just functional. He also laid out his gear, a tactical flashlight, a med kit, his knife, and a heavy-duty flashlight that doubled as a weapon. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Isaiah sat by the window, his knife within reach. Then, just after midnight, he heard it, the low rumble of motorcycle engines in the distance. Isaiah's body tensed as the sound grew louder. From the window he saw 6 bikers approaching his house. They parked in front, their engines idling like predators growling before the attack. The leader dismounted first, his boots crunching against the gravel. "Come out, soldier boy," he yelled, his voice dripping with mockery. "Let's settle this like men." Isaiah didn't respond. He stayed in the shadows, his grip on the knife firm. The leader banged on the door again. When there was no answer, he motioned to one of his men, who moved to the side of the house. The sound of a window being pried open reached Isaiah's ears. He moved quickly but silently, positioning himself in the hallway. The faint clatter of the makeshift alarms told him the bikers were inside. The first man stepped into the living room cautiously. He didn't see Isaiah move behind him. In one swift motion, Isaiah grabbed the man, covering his mouth and pressing the flat of the knife against his throat. "One sound, and you're done," Isaiah whispered. The biker froze. Isaiah dragged him to the back door and shoved him outside, locking it behind him. He didn't need to take them all out, he just needed to dismantle their confidence. The next intruder wasn't as quiet. Heavy boots echoed through the hallway as another biker entered. Isaiah stayed low, moving with the precision of a soldier. He waited until the man was close, then stepped out of the shadows, delivering a sharp blow to his ribs with the flashlight. The man doubled over, gasping, and Isaiah finished him with a calculated strike to the head. The noise drew the attention of the others. "He's inside!" one of them yelled. The bikers regrouped, their movements more cautious now. Isaiah used the moment to reposition, moving to the upstairs hallway where he had the high ground. The leader stepped into the house, his expression dark. "Come on out, Cole," he shouted. "Face me like a man." Isaiah didn't respond. When one of the bikers started up the stairs, Isaiah struck, knocking him off balance and sending him tumbling back down. The man landed with a thud, groaning. The others hesitated, their confidence faltering. "You think this is a game?" the leader yelled, his frustration evident. "You're dead, Cole." Isaiah's voice cut through the darkness. "If you step into my house, you better be ready to face what's coming." The words hung in the air, heavy with warning. The bikers exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't going the way they'd planned. Isaiah could see the cracks forming in their bravado. Moving swiftly, Isaiah descended the stairs, his flashlight in one hand, his knife in the other. The bikers turned, but they were too slow. Isaiah struck with precision, disarming one and driving the others back toward the door. The leader stood his ground, but Isaiah advanced, forcing the man to retreat. "Get out," Isaiah said, his voice cold, "and don't come back." The leader hesitated, his fists clenched, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. He motioned to his men, and they stumbled out, their confidence shattered. The roar of their engines faded into the night as they sped away, leaving Isaiah standing in the doorway. He locked the door and surveyed the damage. A broken window, a few scuffs, but nothing he couldn't fix. The important thing was that they were gone. For now. Isaiah sat on the couch, his knife still in hand. He knew this wasn't over, but he'd won this round. And when they came back, if they came back, he'd be ready. Isaiah Cole knew the night wasn't over. The bikers' retreat felt temporary, a pause before the storm. Men like them didn't take humiliation quietly. His instincts told him they would return, stronger and more coordinated. Isaiah wasn't just preparing for another fight, he was preparing for war. The first light of dawn crept through the blinds as Isaiah sat by the window, his knife and flashlight within arm's reach. His body was tense, but his mind sharp. He replayed the events of the night, analyzing his every move. The bikers had underestimated him, but that wouldn't happen again. They would come back angrier, more desperate, and better equipped. Isaiah needed to be ready. By mid-morning, Isaiah stepped outside to assess the damage. The broken window was the most visible reminder of the fight, but it wasn't the only one. Scuff marks on the walls, displaced furniture, and shattered glass told the story of the night's chaos. A neighbor across the street, an elderly man named Mr. Grady, stood on his porch, watching. "You all right, Cole?" Grady called out, his voice gravelly. Isaiah nodded. "Fine." Grady hesitated. "Heard a lot of noise last night. Thought about calling the cops, but figured you had it handled." Isaiah gave a faint smile. "It's taken care of." Grady nodded slowly but didn't press for details. Isaiah appreciated that. He returned inside and began cleaning. The act of putting his house back in order was grounding. Every repaired windowpane and scrubbed wall reminded him that this was his home, and he wasn't about to let anyone take it from him. That afternoon, Isaiah's phone buzzed. The number was unknown, but he answered anyway. The voice on the other end was unmistakable. It was the biker leader. "You think this is over?" the man growled. "You humiliated us. That was a mistake." Isaiah's grip on the phone tightened. "Walk away," he said evenly. "You won't get another chance." The leader chuckled darkly. "You're dead, Cole. We're coming." The call ended abruptly. Isaiah set the phone down and exhaled slowly. The threat wasn't unexpected, but it solidified his resolve. He moved through the house with purpose, reinforcing every point of entry and testing each makeshift alarm. Fishing lines stretched taut, glass shards on windowsills, and empty cans ready to clatter at the slightest movement. Simple tools, but effective. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Isaiah retrieved a small handgun from the bottom of his duffel bag. He hadn't wanted to escalate the situation, but the bikers had forced his hand. He checked the weapon, loaded the magazine, and placed it on the coffee table beside his flashlight and knife. The hours dragged on, the house cloaked in silence. Then, just after midnight, the rumble of engines broke the stillness. Isaiah moved to the window, peering through the blinds. There were more of them this time. 10, maybe 12. Their headlights illuminated the street, casting long shadows on the houses. They dismounted as one, their movement synchronized and deliberate. The leader stepped forward, a crowbar slung over his shoulder. "Cole," he shouted, his voice echoing. "You made a big mistake. This ends tonight." Isaiah didn't respond. He stayed in the shadows, his breathing steady, his senses heightened. The bikers spread out, surrounding the house. One tried the back door, triggering an alarm. The clatter of cans startled him, but it was too late. Isaiah moved swiftly, striking him down with a precise blow and leaving him unconscious on the ground. The others hesitated, but quickly regrouped. Two more bikers entered through a side window, their boots crunching on broken glass. Isaiah waited in the hallway, blending into the darkness. When one of them passed, he struck, disarming the man and delivering a sharp blow to his head. The second biker lunged, but Isaiah sidestepped, using the man's momentum to slam him into the wall. The noise drew the rest of the group inside. The leader barked orders, his voice tinged with frustration. "Get him! Take him down!" Isaiah moved to the stairs, taking the high ground. He picked them off one by one, his military training evident in every calculated strike. By the time the leader made it inside, most of his men were groaning on the floor or retreating. "Come out, Cole," the leader shouted, his voice shaking with anger. "Face me." Isaiah stepped out of the shadows, his gun raised. The leader froze, his bravado faltering as he took in the scene. His men were defeated, their confidence shattered. Isaiah advanced slowly, his movements controlled and deliberate. "You don't have to do this," the leader said, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. Isaiah's tone was cold. "You came into my house. You threatened my life. This ends now." The leader hesitated, his fists clenching and unclenching. Finally, he raised his hands in surrender. "All right," he muttered. "We're done." "Get out," Isaiah said, "and don't come back." The leader nodded, backing away. He motioned to his remaining men, and they scrambled out of the house. The roar of their engines faded into the night, leaving Isaiah alone in the silence. He locked the door and surveyed the damage. The house had taken a beating, but it had held strong, just like him. He sat on the couch, his knife still in hand, and allowed himself to breathe. The fight was over, and he had won. For the first time in days, the house felt like his again. Isaiah closed his eyes, the weight of exhaustion finally catching up to him. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now, he was at peace.